Hey, Sean Q here. In this lesson, you're going to learn what Robert Cialdini coined as the psychological triggers that need to take place in order for you to create a successful launch. Now, these mental triggers create enormous influence in your customers' buying habits. Well, what is a psychological trigger? Well, think of them like levers we mentally pull down that give us confidence to trust our actions. For example, if a man is directing traffic dressed as a police officer, asks you to stop to allow cars to pass before crossing the street, you're likely to stop and wait. Why? Because your quote-unquote authority lever was pulled once you saw his uniform. Let me give you another example. Say you're driving down the road and you see two restaurants with banners that say grand opening. One restaurant has a line circling the entire parking lot with people you can see cannot wait to get inside. And the other is empty with an open sign that's flickering on and off. Now, you're more likely to believe that the food is probably better in that first restaurant than in the second because of the social proof lever you pulled down. That's what a psychological trigger is. When all 7 triggers work in unison, you have the power to create a strong and compelling message that resonates deeply with your customer. Now, we're not going to dive too deep into how you can apply these social triggers into your business. We'll be covering that in Module 3, but for now, you need to know these moving forward. Now, a word of warning, these mental triggers are powerful. If you use these triggers to hurt people or to try and swindle them into giving you money, my team and I will find out and we'll remove you from our community. That's harsh, I know, but this is powerful stuff. And we're only teaching you this on the basis of godly impact. If your goal is to use these 7 triggers to create something amazing, transformational, and life-changing, then you're good to go and you have nothing to worry about. Okay, now let's get started. The first mental trigger is the most powerful trigger of them all. It makes the rest of the triggers do their job. This trigger is called pain v pleasure. Why does a bodybuilder choose to endure years of pain as they tear and rebuild their muscle, eating bland and routine food day after day? It's because they associate pleasure with winning the trophy on a stage in front of their respected peer. They associate pleasure with the attention they'll receive at the beach. And they associate pleasure with the applause they'll attract anywhere they go. It's the same reason police officers rush into an active crime scene. They associate pleasure with saving lives. It's probably also the same reason you chose to join Wealthier You, because of the pleasure of making more money, creating deeper impact, and honoring God through it all. Even Jesus Christ used this trigger as he was describing why we should endure worldly hatred, because of the pleasure of knowing that the world first hated Christ. And we can now associate our lives with the one life that did everything that needed to be done. The universal trigger that will determine whether or not your customers buy from you is if your product or service effectively moves them away from pain and towards pleasure. The second psychological trigger is story. Humans have been telling stories for thousands of years. Jesus Christ used parables as he taught us about the kingdom of heaven. And we even tell stories today as we tell our friends and family about our workplaces or vacations or birthday parties. I mean, one time when I was in church, I wasn't really feeling the worship. I'm not sure if you've been there, where the worship team is maybe playing the same song from the previous week and the guitarist keeps hitting the wrong string on his solo. And all you can do is look around awkwardly, but that was me. But then something caught my eye, and I turned left, and I saw a kid around 16, maybe 17 years old, dressed all in black, with tattoos all over his body. and black nail polish on his hands, lifting his hands and crying because he had just encountered the most living God and was receiving a transformational moment right there. And I immediately realized that even though I may have not felt God's presence, that it was very present, doing transformational work right in front of me, and that my feelings didn't really matter. And I learned something about God at that moment, that I could either press through for my own breakthrough, or I could continue complaining that the band was maybe playing the same song. Now, I just told you a story, and hopefully if I told that story well enough, you were immediately drawn in, and you can probably imagine each moment as I described it, the sight, the sound, maybe even the smell. As you tell stories that resonate with your audience, you have the ability to connect with them online as if they were right next to you and activate the emotional part of their brain. The third psychological trigger is for and against. Creating a common enemy is one of the easiest ways to create unity and camaraderie with our customers. Our enemies cause us to work harder. That's why sports teams always play harder, more strategically, and are willing to go that extra mile when they are playing against their rival team. It's why superheroes fight harder against their arch nemesis. And it's why countries even go to war, to stand up against an enemy of their values and principles. When you communicate what you stand for and against, your customers have an easier time recognizing whether or not their values align with yours. And if they do align, then you've found customers and clients you're gonna love working with and who are gonna love working with you. I've had multiple people, maybe you, message me and tell me, Sean, I joined Wealthier You because I knew I needed to be around other faith-based entrepreneurs. You knew I stood for Christ boldly and unashamedly, and that helped you decide whether to join this community, maybe versus another. The fourth psychological trigger is innovation. Now, this trigger relies on our need for the latest and greatest and our complete dread for boredom. We love new. We love fresh. We love change, even if it's incremental. That's one reason why technology has exploded in the last few decades, because we're constantly receiving something that's cutting edge. That's why we buy new iPhones and iPads and laptops and cars and TVs, even though the changes may be incremental. Remember the original iPhone? It was groundbreaking, game-changing, and industry-shattering. And if I pulled that phone out today, people would probably laugh and give me weird looks. Why? Because we've since had dozens of iterations and new releases. Remember your first TV? I remember my grandparents had one with antennas protruding outward that we had to move around trying to find a good signal. Now we have smart TVs that are controlled with hand movements and not even remote controls, and TVs that are flatter than the average door. Why? Because anytime we get something new, we become happy, at least for a while. That's why getting a package in the mail is so exciting. That Amazon box represents possibilities. It represents something new. It represents the potential for deep satisfaction. You don't need to be game-changing in order to effectively use this trigger. All you have to do is provide something that's more fresh, maybe a little more cutting edge than your competition. The fifth psychological trigger is social proof. Let me ask you this. Let's say you walked into a room filled with about 30 of your family members. These are aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, nieces, and even friends that are just always around, so we call them family. I mean, everyone is in this room. And once you walk in, everyone decides to look straight up at the same time. What would you do? Now, if you're like me, you probably looked up to see what everyone else is looking at. That's social proof put in action. Social proof is the psychological phenomenon where people conform to the actions of others under the assumption that those actions are reflective of the correct behavior. This trigger relies on our need for tribal acceptance. We are communal people. We were created for relationship, which means that an individual is more likely to make the same decision that others in his circle have made, believing that the majority decision was the right one. Now, this can be used for good and for bad. I'm sure you know someone who got caught up with the wrong people. But I also know that you know someone who started attending church, started surrounding themselves with people who were godly, and their entire lives dramatically changed. When you can activate the social proof trigger, you're able to ease the minds of any customers that are on the fence. That's why testimonials and case studies are so powerful. It provides proof that others have found success making the decision they're worried about making and gives them confidence in making a final decision. Think about it. When you go to Amazon to buy a product, what's one of the first things you check? The reviews. You want to make sure you're getting a quality product. And if you're like me, you go to the 1-star reviews because you believe those to be more honest and revealing than the 5 stars. It's easy to believe why reviews are trusted 12 times more than product descriptions and sales copy, because we want to hear real stories from real people. The 6th psychological trigger is anticipation. When I was 9 years old, my parents bought a Christmas tree and placed it right in the corner of our living room, right at the beginning of December, which meant that I had to stare at that tree for nearly a month, watching it as it lit up night after night, and as 1 present, no, 2 presents, no, 6 presents lingered on the bottom, begging to be opened. Every day, I'd say, "Mom, I just want to open 1 present, please." And the dreaded 2 words she'd say every day hit my heart like a torpedo. Not yet. The worst was on Christmas Eve. We had a tradition where we stayed up all the way until midnight so we could open up 1 gift before going to sleep. And all day, opening up that first gift was all I could think about. It was this mega event that I lived through, where time seemed to slow down as I was laser focused on seeing the clock hit 12. 9 p.m. would pass, then 9:30, then 10, then 11, then 11:30, then 11:45, then 11:55, until we heard our grandfather clock ringing and ran to the Christmas tree to grab the 1 present we could open. Telling the story brings back a flood of memories and feelings of happiness. Because it wasn't even about the gift as much as it was about the excitement and anticipation that built throughout the entire Christmas season. That's the power of anticipation. Remember the movie example from the last lesson and how they use a 20-second teaser to create anticipation? They'll hint at what's to come and then leave you high and dry with some kind of cliffhanger foreshadowing a future that's bound to be good. This trigger relies on our incessant curiosity, excitement, and our tendency to look into the future. Successful uses of the anticipation trigger should allow you to set expectations, meet those expectations, and then even exceed them. The 7th and final psychological trigger is scarcity. Scarcity is the phenomenon where when a product or service is exclusive, or maybe even perceived as exclusive, it becomes more attractive. When there's less of something, we want it more. This is the ability to create on-demand value for your product, service, or program by making it exclusive and hard to get. Why? Because when something is rare, it's alluring. Think about it. If all the diamonds in the world vanished, except for 1, and you had the 1, how much do you think you could sell that 1 diamond for? The number would be astronomical. People would bid hundreds of millions of dollars on this 1 diamond. Why? Because not everyone can have it, and because it's difficult to obtain. Scarcity gives you the ability to create a higher perceived value of the work that you do by limiting its access to only a select few, either through limited supply or a deadline to buy. This is why Wealthier You isn't open for enrollment without an application process. Not just anyone can join whenever they want. That's why you'll see a countdown clock during open enrollment season, because it helps communicate that access to Wealthier You is limited, and it encourages and emphasizes quick action. Either you're in or you're out. There's no middle ground and no lukewarm position to be in. Human behavior is such that we tend to purchase something if we know it's the very last one or will no longer be available soon. The fact that there will be consequences for inaction, which is your customer's inability to buy, will push more people towards massive action. If people really believe they're missing out on something, they'll be prompted to act more quickly to receive it. Now, those are the 7 psychological triggers that will increase sales and create higher conversions. But wait, there's more. I'm adding in 3 bonus triggers to this course because you know me, extraordinary service, extraordinary results. So bonus number 1, the 8th psychological trigger is reciprocity. Now, reciprocity relies on our need to want to give something back when something is received, especially if it's given without expectation of return. This principle is pretty straightforward. Give something, get something. Or as the Bible tells it, you reap what you sow. A good example of this is when my wife and I got married. We had several people give us gifts, but there was this one friend that went way above what she was able to do because she had loved us so much and wanted to show us. We were stunned. The next year, she got engaged, and my wife and I looked at each other and immediately thought the exact same thing. We have to get her something really nice. Even though our friend didn't expect something in return, we felt an obligation to reciprocate the value we had received. My friend sowed into our lives, and so we felt obligated to sow back into hers. By first providing unexpected, extraordinary value to your customers and leads in the form of a gift, discounts, meaningful thank you or token of appreciation, or maybe even exclusive offer, you can effectively sow into good ground and expect to reap a harvest. Okay, bonus number 2. The 9th psychological trigger is authority. Now, we are hardwired to respond to authority or even the appearance of authority. Authority relies on our need to shortcut the decision-making process by relying on visual and audible cues we can trust. For example, consider a police officer directing traffic, or a doctor in a lab coat, or a public speaker who's been featured on Inc.com, or a restaurant with the City Award for the best local food hands down. We trust these cues to tell us what to do and who to trust. One way to use the authority trigger is by using the victory stacking strategy, where you essentially list everything you've accomplished that applies to what you're currently focused on. This means using logos of businesses you've worked with before, or photos of you on stage or in action, talking about results you've achieved or clients you've worked with. Here's my victory stacking as of July 2017. Watch how I immediately become an authority in your eyes. My name is Sean Q, and I'm an author, international speaker, and entrepreneur. I lead a 6-figure digital marketing agency and have worked with mega churches, international ministries, global musicians and singers, political candidates, and a host of other dream clients. I also lead an online training university called Wealthier You that trains faith-based entrepreneurs how to create full-time income through digital marketing. Now notice how I immediately became an authority and an expert when I stacked my victories. What are your victories and how can you stack them so that you position yourself as an authority? All right, bonus number 3, number 10 psychological trigger is specificity. We've all had friends exaggerate the numbers or embellish a story just a little bit. The first time they tell the story, the fish they caught was 13 inches long. Then they start telling the story over and over, and a week later, the fish they caught was 5 feet long, took 5 men to reel it in, and even threw a man overboard. Specificity relies on our need for honesty and transparency. People are always skeptical when reading bold claims. We've heard it all before. When I say, last month, I made 5 figures, it's a bit too ambiguous for you to believe. I mean, anyone can say that. But when I say last month, I made $13,421 from 3 clients in my digital marketing agency, the more specific you can be about the results you can achieve, the more believable you will be. And that's it. Those are the 10 mental triggers you can utilize to create a massive launch. Now, it might sound like a lot, but don't worry. In Module 3 of this course, you're going to learn exactly how you can practically implement this in your next launch. Now, what I want you to do right now is get used to using them. So I'm going to give you an exercise. Go to Facebook and post a story about your journey as an entrepreneur. Try to include as many of these as possible, like specificity, authority, stacked victories, social proof, for and against, and the others. And put them to the test. Measure the engagements you get on that post as opposed to what you got last week. Then come back here and post your results. In the next lesson, we're going to do a basic overview of email marketing. Don't worry, you don't need a list of thousands. You just need a list. I'll see you in lesson 4.